So many Muslims try to claim Jesus and say he was a Muslim. But was Jesus really a Muslim? To find out the answer to this question, let's first look at Islam's definition of a Muslim. They believe that it's someone who submits fully to the will of Allah and follows his commandments as revealed through the Prophet Muhammad. Well, here you have your first problem, because the Prophet Muhammad wasn't even born until 570 AD, and Jesus was born around 4 or 5 BC. And the final revelation from Prophet Muhammad was not revealed in Jesus' time. So, according to Islam, all prophets, including Jesus, are considered Muslims because they submit to Allah's will. This is another problem because it doesn't work across the board. If this is the case, then Jews, Christians, and even Hindus would be considered Muslims by this definition because we all submit to the will of God, right? So that doesn't really work if you think about it. So in Islam, this definition is retroactively applied to Jesus based on Islamic theology, not historical or actual textual evidence from Jesus' time. So it's just kind of, it's kind of like made up. You know what I'm saying? They're just kind of like, oh, we're just going to put it back like Islam was from the beginning of time, even though it didn't begin until Muhammad's time, because when he went to tell the Christians and the Jews about it, they didn't know what the heck he was talking about. And they actually rejected him, and he was really angry about it. Hence why there is a big bias in Islam with Christians and Jews and why they hate us. I'm not saying everybody, but it's very taught in the religion of Islam to especially hate the Jews and and believe that Christians and Jews and everybody who's not a Muslim are infidels, right? Let's just keep it real. So, again, like I said, I'm not saying everybody because not everybody even knows about some of the stuff that's said in the Quran about that. But if you go ahead and read it, you're going to find that it's very anti-Semitic, very, very anti-Semitic. So, okay, so let's also take a look at Jesus' self-identity in the Christian scriptures. So in the New Testament, or what the Muslims call the Injil, Jesus' words and actions do not align with Islamic beliefs about submission to Allah as defined by Islam. Jesus called God Father. So Jesus referred to God as his Father, like in Matthew 6:9 and in John 10:30. The concept of Father is alien and even blasphemous in Islam, which strictly emphasizes Allah as a singular transcendent being. Jesus' intimate relationship with God as Father contradicts the Islamic understanding of Jesus as merely a prophet submitting to Islam. So another problem is Jesus accepted worship. In several instances, Jesus accepts worship in Matthew 28:9 and in John 9:38. Worship is due only to God in Islam. So if Jesus were a Muslim, he would have to reject the worship and direct the people to worship Allah alone, as Muhammad did. Again, we also see this when angels come down to talk to people in the Bible, how sometimes people will bow down and try to worship them, and the angels do not accept the worship. They say, worship God alone, right? Except in the instances where it's the angel of Yahweh or the angel of the Lord, where it is God himself coming down, or we like to believe in Christianity that that's Jesus pre-incarnate, right? Because in those cases, the angel of Yahweh accepts worship, so we know that that's not just a regular angel, we know that that is God, right? So, because if it was an angel, it would not accept worship. They even accept sacrifices and things like that when it's the angel of Yahweh in some cases, like with Gideon and Abraham and Joshua, etc., right? So you can look that up if you're not aware of those scriptures. So another problem is that Jesus forgave sins. In Mark 2:5-7, Jesus forgives sins, which provoked outrage from the religious leaders who recognize this as something that only God can do. Yeah, they saw this as blasphemy, because if Jesus is not God, then he can't forgive sins. So they were outraged and they were angry because they didn't believe that he was, and they were like, no, this is blasphemy, right? So if Jesus didn't claim this, if he didn't claim to be God in any any way, then why did the religious leaders act this way? You have to ask yourself that. If you're like, no, he didn't ever claim to be God, well then why did they freak out? Why did they call it blasphemy? What was blasphemous about that? Then why would Jesus say, I can forgive sins? Only God can forgive sins, correct? That doesn't even make sense to say that he's not if he says he can forgive sins, right? So if Jesus were a Muslim prophet, he would not claim authority to forgive sins, as that power belongs exclusively to Allah in Islam, like I said. So now Muslims will try and say that the gospel we currently have has been corrupted, but let me ask you this. If the Quran says, let the people of the book judge by the Torah and the Injil, or the gospel, but all we have is a corrupted version of the Torah and the Injil, then what does Allah expect Christians and Jews to judge by? Did Allah make a mistake by preserving the Quran alone, but not the Torah and the Gospels? And if that's the case, why would he command the people in the Quran to have Christians and Jews judged by their scriptures if he did not preserve them? I mean, what kind of God is this that we're serving, right? It doesn't even make any sense. What can we judge by? If you're a Muslim, then you have to answer this question if you believe that our books have been corrupted, okay? You can't just say, oh, they've been corrupted and that's it. But your own book, the Quran, says for us to judge by the Torah and the Gospels. And if we don't have them, then what does Allah expect us to judge by? It doesn't make any sense, right? So another thing we have to consider is Jesus' teachings versus Islamic theology. The concept of God is very different. In Christianity, Jesus affirmed the concept of God as Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in Matthew 28:19. But in Islam, the Quran explicitly rejects the Trinity in Surah 4:171. If Jesus were a Muslim, he would not have taught or acted in ways that affirm the Trinity. I think it's interesting, though, how the quote from Jesus in the Quran does not match up with any of the Gospels or New Testament writings at all. Like, at all. Like, none of the quotes that the Quran gives for things that Jesus said match it up. It almost seems like if it was just made up. If you compare the two. I mean, really, which one do you believe, right? We have multiple writings, though, from multiple people in the Bible who claim the same things about Jesus in the Old and New Testament. The Old and the New Testament prophecies, it matches up with the fulfilled prophecies in the New, right? But when Muhammad alone is claiming Jesus said those things that are in the Quran, when he had a clear bias for hating Jews and Christians later on, and when they didn't accept his revelation, is that not suspicious to anyone? I mean, there is a motive there. I'm just saying, think about it logically. It doesn't really make any sense. We don't have any historical writings that match up with what Muhammad is saying, right? So another problem is the purpose of Jesus' mission. Jesus explicitly stated that his purpose was to sacrifice himself for humanity's sins, like in John 3:16 and in Mark 10:45. And there's many other verses that talk about this in the New Testament. And in Isaiah, just read Isaiah 53. This is before Jesus came. This is prophesying the Messiah's coming. Isaiah 53 prophesies that the Messiah would die. So for Muslims to say that that didn't even happen, then is there still someone coming to die because Isaiah prophesied it? I mean, it hasn't happened yet. Like, what are we looking at here? Islam denies that Jesus died on the cross in Surah 4:157, instead claiming that he was saved by Allah. So if Jesus were a Muslim, his mission would not center on atonement or redemption. So none of this, again, matches up. So historical and cultural context is another thing to think about and consider. Jesus practiced Judaism. Jesus lived as a Jew and adhered to Jewish customs, which predate Islam by centuries. This is not something that is debatable. This is widely known and accepted even by atheist scholars, even by people who don't even follow Jesus as a Christian or anything. This isn't this isn't something that is not known. Jesus wasn't an Arab Muslim. He was a Jew who practiced Judaism. Even Jews who don't believe in Jesus know this and accept this. This is widely known. This is not a question for anybody. Even Jews that don't know or read the New Testament know this, right? They know Jesus was a Jew. So there's no historical evidence that Jesus practiced anything resembling Islam, as it was revealed to Muhammad 600 years later. Okay, so this doesn't even make any sense. And Islam's claim is retroactive. So they retroactively claim that all prophets were Muslims, including Jesus, but this is biased on theological reinterpretation, not actual historical evidence. Jesus' Jewish context and his followers, early Christian practices, baptism, communion, belief in his divinity, contradict Islamic claims about his identity. Another issue that we have is contradictions in the Qur'an. So the Qur'an acknowledges Jesus as the Messiah, but denies key aspects of his mission, such as his crucifixion and resurrection, which are central to his historical and theological identity in Christianity, and also all of the Old Testament prophecies. It said that the coming Messiah, like I said in Isaiah, was going to suffer and he was going to die, and that he was going to atone for the sins of the world. This goes all the way back to Abraham. I mean, and all the promise from Adam with Eve and everything. I mean, it's throughout the whole entire Bible. It can't you can't separate it. It's not just one little Christian belief in one verse. It's throughout the entire Bible if you read it. The Quran's reinterpretation of Jesus' mission lacks external historical validation and conflicts with the earlier sources known, like the New Testament. And again, we have these logical inconsistencies. If Jesus were truly a Muslim prophet, his followers would have practiced Islam or something that resembles it, right? Instead, the early Christians worshiped Jesus as God and spread the message of his death and resurrection. If there was anything or any custom that they were following, it was probably I'm not going to say probably, it was Jewish customs, because there was a big debate in the New Testament about the Judaizers and should we get circumcised, should we not get circumcised, should we eat, clean foods or unclean foods, etc., right? There's many things in there. And I know Islam practices some of those things too. But there's more. I mean, there's more than that, where they were back and forth about, should we become Jewish or should we just, be Christians and practice in this other way, right? And so another thing to consider is that there are those in Islam who would claim that Jesus was never thought to be God by anyone, and that it was Constantine and the Council of Nicaea and all this extra stuff that made up the Trinity, etc., etc. But a recent archaeological discovery was found at Megiddo prison, you probably have already heard of it, which shows as proof that Jesus was recognized as divine. The mosaic was found, which was a Roman-era structure identified as one of the oldest Christian prayer halls, dating to around 230 AD, well before Christianity became an officially recognized religion under Constantine. This inscription in Greek refers to Jesus as God, Jesus Christ. This is the earliest known archaeological evidence of such a declaration, showing that early Christians worshiped Jesus as divine. There was also the presence of other Christian symbols such as fish designs, which further proves the Gospels to be accurate in their accounts of who early Christians believed that Jesus was. So another thing to think about is that the idea that Jesus taught monotheism as Islam defines it is also inconsistent with the emergence of Christianity, which emphasizes his divinity and sacrificial role. So while Islam teaches that Jesus was a Muslim, this claim relies on Islamic theology alone and reinterpretation of Jesus' identity rather than his historical evidence or Jesus' teachings as recorded in the New Testament. The Jesus of history and Christianity does not align with Islamic views of submission to Allah or rejection of his divinity. So, all in all, at the end of the day, no, Jesus was not a Muslim. For you to say Jesus was a Muslim, you've got to twist things up. You have to completely reinterpret scripture. You've got to take everything that the Quran says at face value and reject everything we know in history and in all of the texts and in all of the, Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament and everything in order to come to this conclusion. So at the end of the day, no, Jesus was not a Muslim, and you can't prove it with any of these claims.